So welcome, and we're very fortunate and very happy to have Evelyn C. White on with us today. Hi, Evelyn. Thanks for joining me.
Happy to join you, Greg. It's a pleasure.
Amazing. And we're going to chat a little bit about AfriCANthology Perspectives of Black Canadian Poets, which is the project that we're working on together. And Evelyn is one of our esteemed contributors to the anthology project. So, Evelyn, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Well, I am a trained journalist, a dual citizen of Canada and the US. I've lived in Canada now for about 20 years after spending a lot of time in San Francisco, where I was a staff reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle. And it was while there that I became very much aware of the extraordinary work of the writer Alice Walker, best known for her Pulitzer Prize winning novel, The Color Purple. And as a result of my coming to understanding of Alice's history in terms of literature and writing and political activism, I am very still humbled and in disbelief to say that I am Alice Walker's official biographer. So I spent about a decade writing Alice Walker a life as her authorized biographer. But Alice being Alice, she did not request, nor would I have granted her manuscript approval. So she is the ultimate, believer in artistic freedom, which has very much informed my sensibility as a writer. She did not ask to see one syllable of anything that I wrote. And people have said to me, Alice Walker must really trust you a lot. And I agree. I say, yes, I believe that's true. But the more operative sentiment is that Alice Walker really trusts herself. And so I fully believe that she had studied, my work, paid attention to my contributions as a journalist, as an activist. And people can always fool you. This we know, those of us who've been Black all of our lives and other racialized minorities. We know that people can fool us. But Alice Walker took the leap of faith. And I think that she was willing from her place of artistic freedom, of her deep affiliation with ancestral spirits. She took a leap on me, and I think that I proved to be the type of biographer that she expected and deserved. And she certainly fulfilled every imaginable component of her personality in terms of someone that I would dedicate 10 years of my life to writing about. She is as advertised. And so it was enormously rewarding for me. So that's what I can share in terms of who I am in this moment and what I've been shaped by.
So it's really powerful and profound that much of your writing experience and background is in journalism and then moving into biography. And I think that's kind of a nice segue into maybe sharing a little bit about the amazing story that you're going to share as your contribution to the book project. So maybe take a moment to talk about your essay and poem.
Yes, well, I got very little feedback from my official editor when I was writing the biography of Alice Walker. But my editor was herself a poet. This is an editor affiliated with W. Norton in New York City. And one thing that she did say to me at one juncture was, she said, I think you should include more of Alice's poetry. And I've always believed that poetry is the highest genre for me. I don't have a real poetic, bone in my body, not really, but I really respect poetry. And so I added more poetry into my biography of Alice Walker, which was a very good thing. It was excellent advice my editor gave me. So I've always been attuned to poetry. And here in Nova Scotia, I'm a member of the Writers Federation of Nova Scotia, and they have this contest every year, or maybe every couple of years, I'm not sure, called Poetry in Motion, where they open it up to whoever wants to submit poems, and the selected poems are put on the transit system. So they are, you know, very beautifully graphically designed, and you see them on the buses. Now, I had been introduced to the work of Maxine Tynes when I arrived in Nova Scotia from BC in 2012. I had never heard of her. Again, I'm, you know, very attuned to poetry. I think it may have been a geographical thing. I, you know, knew about BC poets, but I had never heard about Maxine Tynes, and someone gave me a copy of her book. I think it was The Door of My Heart, but one of her poetry collections. And I read it, and I was immediately taken by her poetry because it reminded me so much of African American poets such as Alice Walker, Gwendolyn Brooks, Nikki Giovanni, Lucille Clifton, Ntozake Shange, Sonia Sanchez, poetry that's deeply rooted in Black culture and tradition and affirming of it. And so it resonated for me immediately. And then as I lived here longer, I came to understand the complexity of the history of African Nova Scotians and how long they have been, in my view, disrespected, not fully appreciated. And for me to come here as a descendant of Black people who did not receive quote unquote liberation until nearly a century after there were free Black people in Nova Scotia was extremely telling to me. And so I would say to myself and to others, Nova Scotia should have emerged in the absence of racism, should have emerged as the gold standard for Black achievement and leadership in North America, because Nova Scotia had a large component of free Black people nearly a century before my African American forebears were freed by the Emancipation Proclamation. So that irony struck me immediately. It's like, well, why aren't Black people in Nova Scotia more fully understood? Why is this history fully known? Why have so many Black people, African Nova Scotians, told me they'd never had Black teachers? Like, why has this history been suppressed and disrespected for, you know, so many years? And so in Maxine Tynes' poetry, was my first introduction, and I'm sure others have written about it or spoken about it, but her poetry was my introduction to this dichotomy. Here are these people that have been here for generations. And if you know anything about African Nova Scotians, they will tell you in a minute how many generations back they can count their lineage, their ancestry. And so there was this dichotomy of this rich, rich, rich history, and then seemingly no understanding of it, and definitely, in my experience, in my direct experience, no real respect for it. Because I had African Nova Scotians say to me, it said to me, we see Black people come from everywhere else to this province, from the continent of Africa, from the Caribbean, and certainly, you know, you Blacks who come from the United States, and all of you are treated better than we are. And that, you know, has played out in terms of my time here. And so this truth telling, this breaking the silence about the condition of African Nova Scotians and how it has been so, you know, extremely abused and not affirmed and not celebrated, had a profound effect on me. And Maxine Tynes was my introduction to that. And so, as I said, while I'm not a poet, when I had an opportunity or felt that I had an opportunity to write about her. And the theme for the poetry contest had something to do with travel or journeying or being in motion. And so I thought about the fact that Maxine had contracted polio when she was 4 and died from what they call it, post-polio syndrome. And that while I never met her, I've seen photos of her. I knew that she walked with a cane. I've since learned that she was in a wheelchair, you know, as a child. And so I wrote this poem called One Rock. And it's a riff on the very famous Elizabeth Bishop poem, One Art, which is all about losing. And so my poem uh, riffs on Elizabeth Bishop. I bring in allusions to Langston Hughes, to Joni Mitchell, to Alice Walker. You know, you'd have to do a close reading, or I would have to explain it to people to really understand what's going on in there. James Weldon Johnson, God's Trombone. So I'm building on my own history and understanding of the poetic tradition coming from my background as an African American. And then a little bit of the, you know, sort of big names in Nova Scotia, Elizabeth Bishop, who spent a lot of time here, and then the very famous, you know, songwriter, Joni Mitchell. And so I weave all of those lines in there in tribute to Maxine Times.
Which is just brilliant and exactly the kind of story that helps to add the richness and flavor and context and depth to the full experience of Black people north of the 49th parallel, but in particular to the African Nova Scotian experience that Maxine represents. And we're very excited to see you know the end result of the contribution that you make to the anthology. And so I mean, you're speaking about these historical contexts, the tie-ins to poets, you know, on both sides of the border, and you know, in your story, by virtue of being part of the AfriCANthology, will tie in to the stories and poems that are being shared by artists across the country. So, in your mind, why do you think it would be important to do this sort of a project at all, and particularly, you know, in these current times?
Well, the times are, you know, very fraught as they have been for centuries. I was thinking about, you know, we will soon be celebrating the 1 year anniversary of the, you know, videotaped murder of George Floyd. And we all know what that has wrought in terms of a so-called racial reckoning and people, you know, claiming that they're woke or wanting to be woke. And all of a sudden, you know, Blacks are fashionable again. This seems to be cyclical, this sort of situation. So we have that. And then at the same time, or, you know, along with it, a story like that just came out of Vancouver a few days ago about the first Black Supreme Court Justice, Justice Selwyn Romilly, being arrested by Vancouver police while he was walking in Stanley Park. Now, this is, as I understand it, an 80-year-old plus Black man who was apparently doing what he does on a regular basis, you know, in the spirit of health and wellness and well-being, walking in, you know, the beautiful confines of Stanley Park. And apparently the Vancouver police got a notice that a dark-skinned man identified as age 40 or 50, somewhere middle age, was apparently causing a disturbance. The next thing we know, because it's been reported upon by the CBC, is that Justice Romilly had been handcuffed by 5 white police officers. Apparently, over time, you know, he told them who he was. They did not ask for ID, they just summarily handcuffed him. And as he is quoted as saying, here he is, a Black man, you know, at 10 o'clock in the morning, out in nature. People are out, doing their thing, and they're looking at him, and he was, of course, humiliated and embarrassed. And so it's very clear to me that Canada, despite this, which we now know is, a huge lie of being, multicultural and welcoming, and no racism, and there was no slavery, and this was, a wonderful paradise for Black people, we know that not to be true. And it continues not to be true. And so projects like AfriCANthology will help bring the history, the culture, the tradition to the people who claim now, so many of them, that they want to know more. That, I've had people, white Canadians say to me, I don't know why I didn't learn the history. Nobody ever taught me. And I say, don't bring it to me. Bring it to the professors that you had in graduate school. Don't come asking me why you haven't learned this information, this history. Ask the people that hired the professors who taught you, and how much money they were, being paid to maintain this silence. So don't come asking me. What I can do in collaboration with people like you and the other contributors is to lend my voice in the context of a project that's been shaped by someone who mirrors my reflection. And I think and would hope that people who are sincere about wanting to really evaluate the history of this country and their place in it, and how in their ignorance they have been complicit in this ongoing lie about Canada. I would think and hope that, some of these people, a major portion of them, would rush out and buy this book and scream from the mountaintops about it.
There you go. And that's exactly what we're hoping people will do, that they will go out, they will get a copy of this book, they will share the stories and the knowledge and the wisdom and the artistry of the contributors, and contribute to the ongoing evolution of the AfriCANthology Canada project. So I thank you, Evelyn C. White, for taking some time to talk to me about the project, and encourage everybody who sees this video to look out for the release of AfriCANthology Perspectives of Black Canadian Poets in February of 2022, and to see people like Evelyn share their words and their thoughts for the posterity and for the progress of all of us as human beings and as Canadians. Thank you once again, Evelyn, for joining me.
You're welcome. And if I could, I just want to say that I bought these earrings the other day in honor of Maxine. And they say, let's see, I'm so confused here because of the camera, but it says Phenomenal Black Woman, which is, of course, the name of a poem by Maya Angelou, a very famous poem. And I bought these earrings in honor of Miss Maxine Tynes, who every Canadian should know about.
Absolutely. Phenomenally. Thank you
Yeah,
so much for joining.
you're welcome. Take care. Bye bye.